Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Captain CA here. We're going to be breaking down the top 5 early winter bait profiles. These are lures that will guarantee success when the fish start to slide in the creeks. The bait is starting to thin out. They're moving into those deeper bends of the creeks, the holes, or sliding up on the mud flat where the heat zones are to warm up. These are times of the year when it's very predictable where the fish are going to be and how you can catch them. And if you've got the right 5 lures, you really have some spectacular fishing opportunities. So let me grab a few things out of the skiff here and I'll meet you down at the shop. The soft jerk shad comes in at 5 because it does the best job at imitating a dying bait fish, which when that temperature dips, those bait fish get pretty lethargic and they start to swim a little bit more erratic. And nothing does it better than the jerk shad. The jerk shad does a fantastic job in that scenario. Does it the best when you put it on an extra wide gap rigging hook like so. But even if you're going to dart it around, if it's closer to those up, low to mid 60s temps, even if you put it on a lightweight jig head like a 1/16 ounce jig head, it still does a really good job. The natural fall of a fluke bait, it's just here. I'm going to show you the packaging. It's hard to deny, and a lot of the Z-Man baits are scented. The jerk shads in that lineup are scented, which helps add to another sense of the predator fish to make them bite and hold on. This is a good bait to use in those clear low country creeks, and in the early winter after we've had some pretty good cold fronts, those creeks, that water in those creeks gets really clean. It gets washed through that Spartina grass and it gets cleaned up, so it is clear. There are times when you have windy weather or they're close to a river and those can be some turbid scenarios, but for the most part low country creeks in the wintertime get pretty clean. But it also works good in the tannic stained water of the Florida marshes. Many of the marshes that I fish here on the west coast of Florida have that like tea color to them, yet they're still clear. So the soft jerkbait comes in at number 5, and there'd be a strong argument it could have placed higher. Number 4 has to be the soft plastic shrimp. Soft plastic shrimp are, in my opinion, a go-to bait in the wintertime. They just do everything, and that's because it's probably the most active forage in the creeks for fish to hunt. Once we get from early winter all the way through to late winter, they're always there. I have fished with so many guides in the Carolinas, the upper Gulf Coast, Northeast Florida, where their number 1 profile once we get to December is a shrimp profile. Now it can vary in size from 3.5 inches all the way down to like Ned size, but for sure it's a good choice. And why does it shine? It's a subtle presentation. It's the perfect lure for spooky fish. It lands soft, it swims slow, it doesn't have a pulsing tail, you don't have to dart it. I mean, it's just one of those lures that looks not very imposing to the predator fish that might be aware of everything in his zone. So very subtle, very effective. It's also really good under a popping cork, or if you were to work it on a jig head in some of the deeper bends and holes, and it's going to pick up its share of, well, speckled trout and whatever else lives in those deeper holes. Flounder, redfish. It's very good in those places. Now, the way I fish it is usually up on the mud flat, and you've seen plenty of videos. I just did one recently with Captain Brian Chamberlain where we're fishing a creek and we're fishing extremely shallow water, cold, negative lows, making casts up there, and we're dragging it for very short hops, dragging it very short hops and getting it into their cone of awareness, and they're smashing it. That was a great video, and it works great. The Prawn Stars is one of, as you know, I've got one here somewhere. Here's one I got rigged heavy for trout fishing. These little plastic shrimp, they look like the real deal, and they fool the fish. They're just a great tool. Soft plastic shrimps are the best lure to use when the water's cold and low and the fish are, I'm not going to do anything. When they get like that, the shrimp really saves the day. I'm just telling you. Hard not to pick this one number one every time, but we're going to ease into that when I do another video for late winter. But for now, it is what it is. I know it sounds cliche, but the gold spoon, it just simply works, man. It just simply works no matter where you go. It just simply catches redfish. I don't know what, there is no other explanation. I don't know why they want to hit a piece of metal. I recently did an interview / Q&A for FlatsClass University, a private subscription group of mine. And we held it live with Shaw Grigsby, and Shaw was talking about bladed jigs and spoons and spinner baits and how effective they are on redfish. And he uses them in clear water. He uses them when he fishes here in West Central Florida, where these are some of the most pressured redfish arguably in the country, and it still catches them. Why does it work? Reds forage commonly on small minnows in these creeks in the wintertime, and on shrimp that hug the mud and the grass. And you can put that spoon right in there, and it just happens to be the right size for those little tiny fingerling mullet, killifish, mud minnows. It just looks like them all. It can be worked very slow and very low. I know that sounds poetic. And it does not snag. The way these Aqua Dreams are designed, they have a nice weed guard in there, and they do a good job of being able to throw around oyster bars, lime rock, spartina grass without getting hung up. They're perfect for covering the water on the warm-ups. I like them post-front, like second, third day after the front. Water temps are starting to come up. Fish are starting to want to wander around, and if they're going to chase something down, they're going to chase that gold spoon down. If you can just roll it real slow through the mud where it just makes that little puff every once in a while, and if it gets hung on something, don't panic. Just pop it a little bit, it'll pop off. Sometimes that gets them to charge up there and say, oh, what was that? And they eat it. If I had to say, of all the lures I'm going to talk about today, this one stays in my box all the time. And the reason it stays in my box is it simply produces. It outproduces a lot of lures. It's got two redeeming qualities. It has drawing power for me because of the flash and vibration, and it allows me to make some significant, cast, good casting distance, and redfish just respond. That's it. All right, let's talk about the next one. The number 2 bait, the suspending twitch bait, in the wintertime can be your big fish lure. It just, I've got to admit, I can't tell you how excited some of my clients get about throwing mirrodines, throwing shallow diving Paul Browns when we get to Thanksgiving and moving toward Christmas and the new year. Those lures, when that water temperature is in the low 60s and tipping into the high 50s, those fish, that's the big fish time. That's when you're going to get some big trout are going to start womping these baits. And some of the bigger redfish that live in the creek cruise those same edges around oyster bars and creek mouths and tapering mud banks. And while you're trying to catch that big trout, oftentimes you catch the biggest redfish in the creek on these suspending plugs. Now, why do they work? Well, once that water temperature gets down to, let's just say 62, 61, 60 degrees, the trout don't want to chase as hard, but they want that bait that pauses. It's that pause that gets them. They want that twitch, twitch, and pause. That little pause with that little shimmy fall that a Mirrolure has, a 17 MR, an 18 MR if there's some current, 27 MR, or one of the Paul Brown baits, like the Fat Boy or any of those. Those work so well once you get into that November, December window. So don't discount it. It's a big fish bait. They're there because they like the twitch, twitch, pause. And that action pretty much mimics a cold stunned bait fish. So you'll have a lot of the redfish, and especially the bigger trout, they'll suspend in the water column closer to those tapering mud banks where it gets a little bit deeper, or they'll be on the deeper side of an oyster bar. And if you understand where those features are in the creek, okay, and make those casts to work that twitch, twitch, pause, twitch, twitch, pause by those zones, that is how you catch the big fish in that area. That's just how you do it. I do like to work these things around creek mouths. I think a lot of these nice big Paul Brown baits and some of my what I'm going to call my bigger Mirrolures, my 27s and things, I do like to work them around the mouth of the creek on falling water. Many times the trout will sit on the further down in that creek mouth where you can just catch one after another. I was catching some snook because I live in a zone where there's some snook, but we caught a lot of trout in the last video I did, the redfish juice. And I didn't put them all in the video, but we caught a lot of trout in that video, and many of them fell prey to Mirrolures, and they were sitting on that down current side further back in that creek mouth, and it was just outstanding action. And redfish will be sitting on the bottom in some of those same zones. So twitch baits, don't sleep on them as we move into winter, because if there's a time to throw hard baits, or even the Paul Brown, which is kind of a hybrid soft bait / hard bait style, this is the time to get busy with them. I'm telling you right now. All right, let's go to number one. So it really would be hard to argue the fact that the number one bait has to be a paddletail. That's right. It has to, this time of year, it just has to be a paddletail. Early winter, the paddletail is king. A lot of that has to do with the paddletail can imitate both minnows and shrimp. It just depends on how you work the lure. If you're in a deeper creek bend and you want to work it like a shrimp, you've got a 3-inch paddletail on. It happens to be like in a new penny color or a root beer color, like the right stuff. You would just pop it off the bottom and let it fall. Pop it off the bottom like 1-foot hops, and it works. Now they really want a slow, steady, lazy retrieve, something that they can track. Let the jig do all the work. Basically, you just throw it out and you wind it back and you're catching fish. So it does all that very well. The other thing nice about paddletails, depending upon the way you weight them, I mean, typically you're weighting them with anything from 1/8 to a 1/4 ounce jig head. If you want to weight them with a little bit heavier jig, you can work 8, 9, 10 feet of water easily in the deeper bends of the creek. And then if you want to work them up shallow on some busted up, scattered oyster and mud, you could rig them on a rigging hook and you could roll them over the bottom there. I mean paddletails. It's like all you got to do to get a bite is tie one on. These are the universal lure to catch fish, because everywhere you go there's a 3 or 4 inch bait in a creek. I can't say much more than that. That's why they're number one, but I will give you a bonus. Let's talk about that next. So which ones do you throw? Well, here's a simple rule of thumb. If you have cold, deep, and neutral attitude fish, then you should be throwing the Mirrolure or the Prawn Stars. And what do I mean by deep? That could be 3 to 4 feet deep. That's all it has to be. It's not super shallow. Those are the baits, the twitch bait and the shrimp bait, that work the best in those situations, cold, deep, neutral. If you have to cover water, you've got that little bit of a warm up. The fish are starting to, oh, you're on day 3, the sun's out, it's the warmest part of the day. Use that paddletail, use that spoon, cover some water, get a bite, put some fish in the boat. That's what you have to do. Now, if you have clear water and it's low and the fish are finicky, try to fish the deeper spots, but that jerk shad and that prawn stars are probably going to be your best 1-2 punch. Anytime you've got those lethargic fish, you've got to have, or those spooky fish, you've got to have that slow action. And nothing does it better than a scented jerk shads or a prawn stars that you can work so slow up to those spooky, tricky fish. This is the time of year where you don't need a tackle box full of lures. You just need the right 5 lures to have a good day of fishing. And I feel like we've given you 5 good choices right here. But if you think you have a 6th choice, or you want to comment on one of these work for you really well, then please drop a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to interact with some of the community. If you want to get into my subscription community, come on over to FlatsClassUniversity.com. We take a deep dive into subjects like this on a weekly basis in my Chalk Talks. Until next time, I'll be back next week with another fantastic tip right here at FlatsClass YouTube.